And now the closing response by Dr. Craig.
Well, it looks like I am going to wind up talking about theology after all tonight, because Dr. Ayala has in his last speech deserted the scientific arguments and gone exclusively now for the theological arguments against ID. And I find it very ironic that in tonight's debate between a biologist and a theologian, the theologian wants to talk biology and the biologist wants to talk theology. But let's do that. We've not seen any good scientific evidence tonight to think that ID is not viable. So what about these theological objections? Could we have slide 19, please, of the PowerPoints I have? Even though I think it's strictly irrelevant, I'll talk about the theological problem of natural evil. First, let's talk about design flaws in nature. There are various ways in which the Christian theologian might respond to these. First, he might challenge the assumption that these alleged flaws are really flaws at all. Take, for example, the common claim that the placement of the optic nerve in the human eye is flawed. Might God have a good biological reason for so designing the eye? Yes, indeed. As Michael Denton explains, the difference in the placement of the optic nerve in the human eye in comparison with the cephalopod eye is because of the need for a greater supply of oxygen in warm-blooded animals. So this alleged flaw turns out not to be a flaw at all. Over and over again, we have found that what we at first thought were flaws in nature's design have, with greater understanding, turned out not to be flaws at all. But suppose that there are flaws that seem to be the result of natural selection. Fine. Even special creationists usually hold that the kinds created by God in Genesis were on the biological level of the order or family, and that evolution took over from there. So, for example, God created the common ancestor of the family Orsidae, or the bear family, which has since evolved into 8 different species. It's hardly surprising, then, that one species of bear has evolved the so-called panda's thumb, which is sometimes touted as a design flaw, namely in the species of the panda. And it hardly needs to be said that theologians who don't embrace special creationism, but accept the thesis of common ancestry, are not at all surprised that organisms would bear the design imprint of their ancestors. So I don't think this argument from design flaws is a very serious theological problem at all. What then about animal behaviors that strike us as cruel? Once again, even creationists embrace evolution within broad kinds, which permits organisms to change. For example, pathogenic or disease-producing bacteria were once free-living organisms, which evolved to become pathogenic parasites. Genome sequencing has revealed this to be a sort of devolution characterized by a massive loss of genes. Now, of course, this appeal to limited evolution within broad kinds won't ameliorate the general problem of animal suffering. But this is a theological problem which also afflicts Professor Ayala's view as well. Dr. Ayala seems strangely oblivious to the fact that when he quotes in his book David Hull to the effect that the God implied by evolutionary theory is careless, wasteful, indifferent, almost diabolical, Hull is talking about Dr. Ayala's God. So Darwin's so-called gift, I think, may well turn out to be a Trojan horse. Thus, theologians of all stripes have to face the problem of animal suffering. And here, studies in biology have provided, I think, surprising new insights into this old problem. If we could have slides 20 to 26, please. In his book, Nature, Red in Tooth and Claw, Michael Murray distinguishes 3 levels in a hierarchy of pain. Level 1, 20, please, slide 20. Level 1 is information-bearing neural states, which are produced by noxious stimuli, resulting in aversive behavior. Level 2 is a first-order subjective awareness of pain. And then level 3 is a second-level awareness that one is oneself experiencing, too. Now, spiders and insects, the creatures exhibiting the kinds of behavior mentioned by Professor Ayala, like praying mantises, experience 1. but there's no reason at all to attribute two to such creatures. It's plausible that they aren't sentient beings at all, having some sort of inner subjective experience. That sort of experience plausibly doesn't arrive until you get to the level of vertebrates. But even though higher animals do experience pain, nevertheless, the evidence is that they don't experience level 3. That is to say, the awareness that they are themselves in pain. For the awareness that one is oneself in pain requires self-awareness, and this is connected with the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is missing in all other animals except for the humanoid primates. And thus, even though animals may experience pain, they are not aware of being in pain. God, in His mercy, has apparently spared animals the awareness of being in pain. Now, this is a tremendous comfort to those of us who are pet owners, because it means that even though your cat or your dog may be in pain, he or she really isn't aware of being in pain. And therefore, your dog or your cat doesn't suffer the way you would if you were in pain. And what this also means is that arguments like Dr. Ayala's, based upon nature's so-called cruelties, are guilty of the fallacy of anthropopathism, which is ascribing human feelings to non-human entities. We humans have an inveterate tendency to ascribe personal agency to non-human creatures, and even to objects. We talk to our cars, to houseplants, to computers. When we attribute agency and pain awareness to animals, we commit the fallacy of anthropopathism. Now, of course, the question still remains for both Professor Ayala and myself: why did God create a world featuring an evolutionary prelude to the appearance of man? And I suspect that the answer to that question is going to have to do with God's wider plan for humanity, with His desire to create an ecosystem where autonomous human agents can flourish and make an uncoerced decision to embrace or to reject God's offer of saving grace. But a discussion of theological questions of that sort would take us very far afield this evening. Finally, let me comment on Dr. Ayala's claim that ID is not science. For me, it's really a matter of relative indifference whether you class a design inference in biology as science or not. The important question is whether such an inference is warranted, and that can't be decided by mere definitions. Our esteemed moderator, Bradley Monton, in his recent book says, "Even though I'm an atheist, I want to defend intelligent design by taking issue with this line of attack. Ultimately, what we really want to know isn't whether intelligent design is science. What we really want to know is whether intelligent design is true. We could, if we wanted, agree that intelligent design is not science. But if it turns out that intelligent design is true, would the fact that it's not science really matter? Well, not really, I think. And so the real question is it true? And we've not seen anything tonight to think that it's not a viable alternative. Now, Dr. Ayala says, but intelligent design doesn't make predictions or conduct research. Well, I simply beg to differ. Take a look at Stephen Meyer's recent book, The Signature in the Cell. It includes 17 pages of predictions and possible research projects to be pursued. Michael Behe has recently written, the most essential prediction of Darwinism is that given an astronomical number of chances, unintelligent processes can make seemingly designed systems, one of the complexity of those found in the cell. ID specifically denies this, predicting that in the absence of intelligent input, no such systems would develop. So Darwinism and ID make clear, opposite predictions of what we should find when we examine genetic results from a stupendous number of organisms that are under relentless pressure from natural selection. The recent genetic results on bacteria and viruses that I quoted are a stringent test. The results: 1, Darwinism's prediction is falsified. 2, design's prediction is confirmed.